Good morning, everyone. I'm Mindy Crawford, Executive Director of Preservation Pennsylvania. Thank you all for joining us here this morning to talk about preserving the trades. Yesterday, during her keynote address, Sarah Bronin laid out a plan for the future of historic preservation, a call for all of us to ensure that our precious historic resources are preserved, reused, and interpreted for all of our shared history. One point that she made was the need to increase our access to preservation trades, to make sure that those very valuable resources are available to those of us who have a passion for preserving historic buildings, whether it's our own house or the state capitol building. Anyone with an old house has lamented over the ability to find qualified contractors and craftspeople to work on their houses. Over the years, I have always owned an old house and have had to deal with that myself. And I, many years ago, had the name of a plasterer that I kept in my contacts. I guarded it like a dragon guarding a treasure because I did not want to share it with just anyone. He was retired, he had great skills, and he would only take the jobs that he found interesting and only for people who he thought would appreciate his talents. He was quite an interesting guy. And so I didn't give that to just anyone. I kept it carefully hidden away, and you had to prove to me that you were able to, use it wisely. Now, before you ask, he's passed away, and unfortunately, his skills and crafts were lost with him. And so that is something that we have to be aware of. Even now, when I meet a professional who I am impressed with their work, I eagerly ask them if they want to drive to Hanover, Pennsylvania to work on my 1903 Queen Anne house. Sadly, they shake their heads and say, I am swamped and I can't take on another client. This situation is a crisis. It's a crisis for all of us who love historic buildings. Luckily, today we've assembled a panel of professionals who are working to keep the trades alive and to ensure that we will be able to find the qualified professionals we need in the future. I'd like to introduce you to our speakers. Nicholas Redding is the Executive Director of Preservation Maryland. Dr. Stephen Hartley is the Director of Construction Management at the Williamson College of the Trades in Media, Pennsylvania. And Andy DeGrucci is the owner and founder of Limeworks US and Craftswork Training Center. Nick's going to start us off today talking about the work he is doing with the National Park Service and beyond. Steve will then talk about the programs at Williamson College and how we are training the next generation of professionals. And finally, Andy will share his vision for starting the Craftswork Training Center and how he is making sure that we find quality people to work on the projects. Now, those of you who are watching, please feel free to chat, to ask any questions or make any comments in the chat box. We have hopefully given sufficient time to be able to answer all your questions at the end, so feel free to just put them there as they come to mind. And so now I'll just turn it over to Nick.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk. I feel like I'm preaching the gospel of trades wherever I go. I've had the chance to talk to a bunch of different groups in a bunch of different places, and our involvement as an organization came from a similar story to probably what you heard from Mindy, which is we hear over and over and over again that people don't or can't get access to qualified tradespeople. And so how could we fix that? And at the same time, I think as an organization, we were taking a bigger look, and we continue to, and every day we do it, about what is the relevance of our mission, what is the relevance of our work, and how do we use historic preservation to solve larger societal challenges. It can't just be about saving old buildings for the sake of old buildings or because they're pretty, even though I'm sure most of us on this and tuning in love old buildings. There has to be something beyond that, and whether that's economic or community value, or in this case, the workforce value associated with restoring a building and the value associated with that. So we had already been very interested in this concept for several years. We're fortunate as an organization that the National Park Service's Historic Preservation Training Center, which is a program of the Park Service that was established 40 odd years ago, is based in Frederick, Maryland. So they're sort of in our backyard as an organization, as a statewide historic preservation group. And we reached out to them and spoke with them about this idea of partnering and figuring out what is it that we could do to help expand trades, what were they working on, and what we've effectively established is a partnership, not unlike what you might be familiar with a more traditional national park unit, where you have a friends group or something like that, or the Gettysburg Foundation, or any type of philanthropic arrangement. We're the philanthropic partner of the training center, which allows us to raise funds in their name and to expend funds on their behalf, and allows us to work on different projects and initiatives in partnership in ways that perhaps they would be unable to do alone, just as we would be unable to do alone. So they come with a lot of skill sets. There are about 75 employees at the training center, and they do somewhere in the range of about $12 to $15 million worth of preservation work every year. They're a fee-for-service unit of the National Park Service, so they are unique in that most Park Service units get a bundle of cash from the federal government every year, and then they spend it. Training Center only gets a few $100,000 every year. The majority of those $12 to $15 million are secured by doing contract work with other national park or state or nonprofit organizations. So we had been working in tandem on trying to expand access, awareness, recruitment around their traditional trades apprenticeship program, which is a 6 to 9 month paid program in the field for young adults, which are defined as 18 to 30, or recent veterans, putting them in the field, getting them, and as the two other speakers will attest, 6 to 9 months will not make you a master of any trade, but it's enough to give you a taste of the work. And the other great thing about this program is that at the end of it, because of the public service authority that comes with it, they are eligible for non-competitive federal hiring. So they can either easily go into the federal government and continue this work and continue their training, or they're abundantly qualified to go out and get a private sector job and continue their training there. So this is just an entree to the trades. Well, obviously, and it's interesting, I think it's, pretty obvious that the pandemic continues to have an impact because we're all speaking on a Zoom panel instead of in person. But I think for a lot of presentations, it's sort of like, well, the pandemic did this, and we're not operating as normal, and that happened to us for a second, and we call it the pandemic pause, and it gave us a pause, and it's a part of the story that I want to share with everyone, is that we couldn't put people in the field, young adults, recent veterans. It wasn't safe to do that, and it wasn't imperative to put them in the field like it might be in a regular private sector operation. And so it gave us a moment with the Park Service to think about, like, well, what are the systemic challenges and barriers to the work that we're doing? We can train, and in 2019, we had about 60 odd apprentices in the field over the course of a year. That's a good amount of people that were getting into historic trades, but it's not probably going to move the needle on the overall need. And so we started talking at the same time with the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, which has now established this federal trades task force that is looking at what kind of federal policy could be adjusted to help trades training, which is an important component of this because there's some systemic barriers that exist at the federal level. And so we shifted in a way because of the pandemic into looking at these broader national issues with our Park Service and Advisory Council colleagues. And we've come up with a couple key things that we're now working on and have secured some funding to address that we hope will impact the work of folks all across the state of Pennsylvania and every other state for that matter. And one of them is in the next year, we're going to be completing a landscape survey of all trades training programs in the country. Historic trades training programs, because there's no one place where you can go to look and see where all of that information is. It lives in some people's heads, and different people have bits and pieces of it. But what we want to know is how many out there, what's doing well, what is not doing well, and what are the challenges associated with that. So we're going to be completing that. The other thing that we're going to be working on that is going to be informed by that landscape survey is identifying and creating a first of its kind sort of open source curricula that would be something that if a nonprofit or a local organization or a for-profit for that matter wanted to pick up and use for trades training, they could do. Because we bump into this a lot, and I'm sure Mindy does as well, where it's local organizations, maybe they want to train 2 or 3 people on a specific skill set, and they want to know, like, well, is there a curriculum out there? Is there something we can pick up and that we could deploy and that we could hire trainers to use that is rigorous and that meets some type of certification? And of course, the challenge is there isn't when it comes to the curricula, because a lot of it is closed source. So it's, some type of school or something has developed something, and that's great. But then the other challenge is that second piece, and it meets some type of certification. And the challenge that we run into and that we see, and that is one of these systemic barriers, is that the Federal Department of Labor recognizes, for example, carpentry, but they don't recognize historic carpentry, and they don't recognize preservation carpentry skills or rehabilitation carpentry skills. And the same with masonry and a slew of other trades. And so at the same time, we also have funding to throw at, finally, and we've begun conversations with the Federal Department of Labor, creating, and they're probably going to be subcategories of existing trades, preservation or rehabilitation versions of those. The reason why these sort of wonky, bureaucratic, boring things matter is that it will, hopefully, we believe, unlock vast amounts of funding to train preservation tradespeople, historic tradespeople that otherwise are not available. Because one of the things that we did probably 5 or 6 years ago now is we thought, we're going to do this. This is before our partnership with the training center. And we went to the Maryland Department of Labor and said, we want to get, you have all this money you're talking about. We want to get money to train, historic carpenters. And they said, well, we have carpentry programs. And they didn't recognize any difference between what we were attempting to do and what a traditional carpenter would do. And that's because most states just follow whatever the federal government, the Federal Department of Labor gives them. So if we can change it at the federal level, which we can, then that will flow to the states. And then if people have access to open source curricula, which they will, and we know what programs also exist out there, not only will this provide potentially more funding for existing programs, but it will allow others to start up their own, or at the very least, to provide a path towards certification, which is also an important component of this, so that we know the people doing this work actually have the skill sets and have met some common standard that will be national in its scope. So the pandemic in this case has actually given us a moment to think bigger and also to look at those federal policies. And so while all of this is going on, our work with the advisory council continues as well. And there we're trying to promote sort of an all-government approach towards embracing historic trades work rather than new build, towards embracing the value of rehabilitation of federal buildings rather than new build, and then also sort of leaving no stone unturned. And one of the things we uncovered is that the enabling legislation for the National Historic Preservation Act actually talks about allowing CLG grants, or the grants from the Historic Preservation Fund, to support and fund historic trades training. And that, to our knowledge, really is never done. It's very rarely done. It has been done in New York State, from what we understand, and some other hits and pieces here and there. But it's something at the federal level we can prioritize and let the SHPOs know that this is something we can and should fund. It doesn't just have to be research and documentation. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But it's important for us to take an all of the above approach. And coming back to where I started, think about the relevance of our work and the relevance of preservation. And at this moment, speaking of the pandemic, and I'll stop here, the pandemic has uncovered obviously systemic challenges when it comes to our communities, when it comes to health disparities, when it comes to the way in which we talk about history and heritage and some of these clashes that are happening right now. And make no mistake about it, preservation either can be part of the solution or it can be part of the problem. And I think we have an opportunity to change people's perspectives on what it is we can do. And if we can give them a job, that's all the better. And we haven't seen unemployment figures on par with where we saw them over the past 6 months since the Great Depression, since our grandparents or great grandparents or great great grandparents, depending on how young you are, generation. And so, if preservation can figure out a way to unlock good paying jobs that can't be outsourced, then we have an opportunity to truly be relevant to that next generation and to diversify the face of trades and preservation at the same time. So trades are critically important to the future of preservation because they make it possible, and they have an opportunity to make it relevant and more diverse. But we've got to get it right at the systemic, at this big national level. And so that's where we've turned our attention while still maintaining this apprenticeship program, which we hope will get back into the field in 2021. And so obviously we have some other colleagues here who are going to talk about the work that they're doing. And so we're going to go from this big national picture to training at a university and then the nuts and bolts of actually getting people to do this work. But that is our perspective, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you guys today.
Well,
Thank you, Nick.
thanks,
Go
Nick. And it's interesting because as Nick was talking, I was thinking about how some of those systemic problems affect the ability of university or post-secondary education programs to actually survive and thrive. And I'm glad to see that kind of stuff is being addressed. Real quick, just so you guys know a little bit, I am the director of construction management here with College of Trades. Williamson's a pretty unique model, and Andy can testify to it as a graduate of Williamson. Williamson was set up as a school it's an all-male school. Every student gets a full scholarship. They are required to live on campus. We only accept about 100 students a year in 6 shops. So it's carpentry, paint, the masonry, commonly known as the brick shop, horticulture, power plant, and machine tool. So the 2 that I work with more often than not is the carpentry and the brick shop. For those of you who haven't been to campus, and hopefully we'll allow people, once the pandemic opens back up, to allow people back on campus, Frank Furness designed our entire campus. So it is the largest collection of Frank Furness buildings in the world. And the students live in Frank Furness dorms. I'm sitting in a Furness building right now. The students during their time have to do repair work and maintenance on these buildings on campus. And as the Furness buildings have started to age, they have realized that we do need some proper preservation training and skill work for our students. And with the advisory councils that are created for these programs, particularly in the masonry shop, they're saying we need more people with preservation skills. So the programs at Williamson right now are going through a reconfiguration where they will have more specialty training. The brick shop will have a specialization in what they call advanced masonry, which is going to be more on the historic preservation side. The carpentry shop is going to do what they call advanced carpentry, which is going to be built-ins and things, decorative detailing and things like that, that will actually prepare these guys to enter this field. But we're not a preservation program per se. And in terms of preservation programs, hands-on preservation programs, nationally, there are 5 associate degree programs and 2 bachelor's programs. And that is it. The oldest program is Belmont College in St. Clairsville, Ohio. Original program was actually in Durham Tech. Only lasted 2 years ago, or two or 3 years. Great friend John Puzzolo, who worked for PMRC for a long time, was actually the founder of that. But when you look on a national level, you have St. Clairsville, Ohio, and there is not a degree granting program from St. Clairsville, Ohio to Astoria, Oregon. So there is close to a 1,700-mile distance between training programs in the United States. There are a few reasons for this. One is something that Nick brought up, is the idea of job placement, and particularly in the associate degree level, community and technical colleges, they look at job placement, and the Department of Labor numbers aren't there. So there are plenty of people out there doing preservation work. Daniel Thiele, in his PhD a few years ago, wrote about the invisible craftsman. Work that gets done on the side that isn't reported. Workers that are paid as independent contractors that don't actually file their taxes. That kind of stuff, the workforce is actually much more robust and much deeper than we actually know. If the all numbers aren't there, schools are hesitant to actually create programs that they don't know where the job market is. The other thing about one thing that actually discourages students or programs to actually be formed is the cost of them. They are material intensive, they are space intensive, they are equipment intensive, and they are instructor intensive, which means that their cost, typically with these programs, they have the largest expenditure per student out of any program in those state systems. So safety-wise, and I'm sure Andy can testify to this, you can't put 30 kids, 30 students in a workshop. It's not a lecture hall where 50 kids taking college algebra is fine. The average safe number of people to work is 11. So the cost of these programs is much higher than any other program, and because of that, they're always sort of on the chopping block. And particularly now, as we look at schools having lower enrollments because of the pandemic, but also for larger reasons in a shrinking college-age population, programs like this, when you look at all those negatives from a college administrator standpoint, is one of these things that we need to cut this. If we need to save our nursing program, if we need to save our welding program, there's no problems with being a nurse or being a welder by any means. Something has to go, and they're most likely the preservation programs. So I always make the comparison that it's like a balance. As you know, we are here in October. Those of you that like horoscopes, got your Libra balance. The cost, the materials, the space is going to weigh you down. The only thing that's actually going to save you and balance that out is the prestige of having a preservation program and being out there and engaging with those local communities. Or being, as Dave Mertz at Belmont Tech, Dave's been there for 30 years. And he's built a lot of connections with a lot of different schools over the years. And his graduates have gone everywhere. In fact, I'm sure you'll see plenty of them in Maryland at the training center. How do you get to that level? And unfortunately, a lot of programs never get to that level because they're working their way up, and then something happens that's beyond their control. There's a budget issue with the school. The faculty member leaves. A lot of times these are personalization programs. The program in Astoria, Oregon at Classic Community College, that is Lucian's program. Lucian founded it, he ran it, or he's running it, and that is him. That's who you call. The same with Dave in Belmont. Those people are not there forever. Just as Mindy said about her plasterer, they do move on or they decide not to do this anymore. What happens to the program at that point? And there have been programs that have started. W. Stevens had one for, I believe, about 2 years. Unfortunately, it happened about 2009, which was not the best time to start a program. Down in Bel Air, Maryland, there was one for a little bit. Out in Indiana, in Colorado, tying with the AmeriCorps programs. Unfortunately, none of those seem to have made it. But because we are such a degree-laden society, where you have kids going out of college, and I talk to my students here all the time, their guidance counselors push them to four-year universities. And so you don't want to go to a trade school, because that means you're lower than. For a lot of people in our society, working with your hands is considered a failure. Yet at the same time, and I was discussing with the Smithsonian Folklife and Cultural Heritage Center is currently doing a Building Arts and Traditional Architecture initiative, which ties very closely to what Nick and Preservation Maryland is doing. And I was interviewing with one of their interns this summer, and I said, look, who's essential right now? I said, the mechanics are essential, the plumbers are essential, masons are essential. I said, right now, as a teacher, I'm not considered essential. The guys that are working with their hands are the ones that are still getting paychecks. And the student, who was an architecture student, said, I didn't even think about it like that. And unfortunately, a lot of people in this country don't think about it like that. And as Nick said, these are jobs that cannot be outsourced. If I need a mason on site to build something, I can't call Andy and have him do it over a Zoom call. He's got to come to my site and work. And that's something that a lot in this society, in American society, we don't actually seem to value as much. And hopefully we can value this more as we eliminated shop programs in schools. I remember when I was in high school, they cut one more shop program every year. So now we have a whole generation who have never actually realized that this could be a job. And, when I got out of high school and when I was an undergraduate, I didn't know that this was a career. It wasn't until I got into grad school and I turned out I had been working construction as a side job for 6 or 7 years now. Well, I'm already doing preservation. So there wasn't a spot for me to actually start engaging with the traditional crafts. And I, unfortunately, will be the first to admit I made a whole lot of mistakes in those years when I first started because I didn't know what I was doing. And for these students and these graduates who need that piece of paper on the wall that their parents and their guidance counselors and their and society says that you have to have without knowing that this is a viable career, we're not going to be able to refill those ranks of those people that are stepping away from the trades. And because of that, I think programs like what Andy is doing at the Craftwork Training Center are vital to introducing students to those programs and to those trades. And at this point, what I want to do is turn it over to Andy so we can talk a little bit about what he's doing so we have enough time for questions and answers. So, Andy?
Okay. All right. Yeah, my name is Andy DeGruchy, and I did go to the Williamson Free School of Mechanical Trades, now called Williamson College of the Trades. Some 40 years ago, I was living there. Decided out of high school without enough money to go to college and not knowing what career path to go. Heard a Dan Fogelberg song, I'm dating myself, that leader of the band, his father was a cabinet maker's son. And there's probably a little bit of artsy in me, and I thought that sounded romantic, a cabinet maker's son. So I thought I'd pursue a trade, and I had no trade experience prior to Williamson. My family didn't come from a trades background. So I'm the one who went that road less traveled by, and I attended Williamson, and I fell in love with the masonry trade there. That's a key part about the whole issue about transferring a trade to someone. You need a mentor. You need someone who passes the torch, and they have to have a love for the craft, and then they will, be able to take an underling and maybe pass that energy over to them. So I'm sitting here in my office here. I've been running a masonry restoration business now 36 years. And well, when I got out of school, I worked for a few different contractors as their resident mason, and learned some other trades because some of these contractors did multifaceted type of construction. So I would, when not doing masonry, they'd have me framing and doing other things. So that's how I got the start out. Had trowel and had truck wheel travel, and I did work for people. And then I was disillusioned because I did not realize how volatile the construction industry was. I didn't realize that there were really not many benefits, especially in private industry. It wasn't benefits. You know, if your back went, you know, you could see maybe your employer would be looking at you like a piece of depreciable equipment, like you're going to go in the scrap pile next. And I thought, you know, I didn't go to this trade school to live there 3 years to just get abused. Really, I thought, you know, I learned all these wonderful things at Williamson, and I fell in love with the trade, and I wanted to execute the trade in the best proper manner. And so I thought, I'm going to start my own business. And so I did that 36 years ago. 6 months into business, someone asked us to repoint an old stone farmhouse. And I live in Bucks County. So we are littered with stone farmhouses. And I thought, you know, I really enjoyed that type of masonry. And it was not something that we learned at Williamson, masonry restoration. But I decided to take the 2-week intensive class that's from New York City. It's called Restore, all caps. And they teach a intensive workshop in Williamsburg, Virginia. And that's where I actually met Dan Hittelbeidel, who was I was on the committee to find Dan as the masonry instructor there. Oh, gee, I don't know. He must have been there 30 years. But anyway, I met Dan at that. He also was a instructor at a Coatesville trade school, and there wasn't any masonry restoration training there. He had that little key element, a love for the trade. Boy, did he have a love for trade. Anybody knows Dan knows he's just a man's mason's man. You know, everyone loves Dan, and especially his enthusiasm for being a bricklayer. And so anyway, he went on his own volition to the Restore program in Williamsburg, and that's where I met him. Then when I came away from the Restore program, something had opened my eyes there, and that was the professor from Columbia University, Norman Weiss. The architectural conservation departments at Columbia and at University of Pennsylvania kind of go arm in arm, and you know, they graduate a lot of people who end up affecting the conservation of our built environment by the graduates who are conservators and so on. Well, anyway, at Williamson, hey, they taught us, here's a trowel, here's a brick, here's a string line. Don't ask questions. I mean, they ask questions, but it wasn't about material science. It wasn't about like cement or lime as far as like which would be better. Although the truth is we have 6,000 years of building history that lime and sands were mortar for the most part, and a limited window of time where modern Portland cements were used. And so Norman Weiss brought that up in Williamsburg, and then also the attributes of the lime. Okay, and some amazing things like, you know, autogenous healing and all kinds of wonderful things. I'm like, geez, why did we ever switch, you know? And so I began to be a kind of a groupie, a geek of the subject matter, and I began to follow symposiums wherever they were by APT or, you know, whoever might have a special program on lime mortar and preservation. So I ended up at the Scottish Lime Centre in Fife, Scotland. And there they pointed me to a manufacturer who's been around 170 years, who has kept the time-honored tradition of producing a lime a certain way. And my quest for going to the Scottish Lime Centre and going around the world trying to find the right material was that once you become a lifer in a trade, you're kind of interested in money. I mean, we're all interested in money, but something else takes over, and that is the drive and the love for the subject matter. And that's the one thing that if we're going to institute any future generations of people that will carry on the torch and go with it to great distances. I mean, they're the distances where we look at, you go on row homes in the inner cities and you say, oh my gosh, look at the woodwork in here. Look at the craftsmanship. These weren't dumb guys that were executing this millwork and putting these pocket doors in and all this stuff. So anybody who's going to take the trade to an incredible level again needs to really be enthralled with the intricacies of the subject matter. So Norman Weiss birthed that in me, by talking to me about material scientists and leaving enough question marks that I needed to get those answered. And then when I went to the Scottish Lime Center, because I really only needed what I say is my good gold medal flour to make my cookies. In other words, I was already steeped in restoring historic structures, but I wanted to up my game. And no one put a gun to my head to say, go buy lime or start to do it this way or that. I only loved what I did, and I wanted to do it better. And if you interview anybody who's been in a trade, a 30-year guy or something like that, he'll always say that one thing that motivates them, outside of money, of course, they want to make a great living and all, but they'll say they love to drive down the road and say, I built that. I worked on that one. I know some details about this or that. There's something that takes you to another level when you find that you fell in love with the craft. So as we know, Votechs are closing their masonry programs down often. A lot of young people don't want to go into the trades. I think there is a stigma of a second-class citizen, which I was completely oblivious to when I went to trade. I just was, in love with the art of it all. I did not realize what I was signing up for. 30 years of hard labor, but really, it's been. I get up every day. I love what I do. And that is the key. If someone can find themselves doing a craft and find themselves involved in something significantly important, like the preservation of our cultural identity and resources, it just puts wind in your sails. You feel like this is purposeful, and so that's a key element. And so right now, how it's been seen is, K through 12 systems often say to Johnny, you're a little ADD. You're a little bit like you're not cutting it in school. Maybe you should try Votech, So Votech has gotten this stigma, and then secondly, when the trades, in a sense, have been dumbed down, everything's been palletized. There's no more quarries that produce. There's quarries that produce stone, but not like there was in the heyday, And same with roofing, slate. The best roof you can put is a 300-year roof now. That we know what went wrong with the first go around with the nails and so on. You can get a wonderful roof for a church or something. We try to convince them, look, slate's going to be amortized out, your best value. But all the slate quarries and the quarries, everything's been palletized and dumbed down to what we call lick 'em and stick 'em stone, manufactured stone. And then it's also been dumbed down with let's say it's been value engineered. Words I really don't like, but those are used all the time. We value engineered this to be, basically what it is a lot of construction, new construction has maintained all the sexy roof lines and everything else, but it's for point of sale, stick framed, heat pumps. Who cares? You own it after you just signed on the line for the mortgage, and so that's the way modern construction goes, but with those who work in the intricacies of a very substantial craft, which would be the old ways of doing, whether it be metal work or stained glass or masonry or carpentry, timber framing, so on, is they have to line themselves up with, and they're, hey, I'm evidence. I've been doing this 40 years. They have to line themselves up with people whose purse strings are going to say, hey, guess what? I'm tired of all that crapola that you get in cookie cutter mansions and things like that. I want to pay for good quality work. More and more people are, I feel, I never run out of them, are demanding high-end quality work. As Mindy said, she kept guarded her precious plaster because they're few and far between. Well, the thing is that I think that if a young person were to go in a trade, if you were to convince them to come in a trade, I think the very first thing, all these things I'm saying are just words, like Charlie Brown, ma, the adults when they talk, kids are like, well, I don't hear anything until you say livable wage. Like, in other words, if you start to talk about the money at first, they may perk up because they know they need to make a living. And so the dumbing down the trades has caused systems to be able to be installed by like trained monkeys, and that's what it is. So that therefore it is not anyone who's thinking, I don't want to become a trained monkey. I want to become an artist. I want to create something of great value. And so, and in doing so, some, as starving artists, we all know the word starving artists, some will give their whole life to their craft, even though money isn't a part of it, because they love what they do. So I felt, in what I'm going to get to, what I'm trying to do with the Craftwork Training Center is try to convince a young person that it's honorable to work with your hands, that you're using, your head, your heart, your hands, you're creating something of value, and then you're getting paid for it, and you're getting paid well for it. And you come away with that. And if someone were to get into the groove of that, even if I lure them in to come to take a couple of classes at the Craftwork Training Center, which our Craftwork Training Center, what that's all about is in Telford, Pennsylvania. After already being, in this trade, 40 years, which I thought, geez, I'm about 60, and I got a birthday card. One of my guys is turning 60 tomorrow, so we're all in our 60s. So you think, well, how long could we do this? Like till we're 70 or 75? You hear of old timers that stay in it, but we got to be wise about figuring we got a good 10 years maybe to pass the baton. If we're going to pass the baton, I think that is the very legacy thing we need to do. People in our age group now who have given our life to the trade have to start to think of how to pass the baton, and that's what we're doing at Craftwork Training Center. So I've been in it 40 years, and then I had asked my wife, please, I got this beautiful farmstead down in Telford, Pennsylvania that goes back to 1736 with all these antique buildings. And I feel that I can continue to serve my industry with the lime mortars that we sell. Because once I imported the lime from France, from that company that was so dependable, others wanted the materials. And my company, Limeworks, supplied all the mortar to repoint St. Patrick's Cathedral and University of Virginia's Rotunda Dome, the mortar and the plaster, down at Reading Terminal Market. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. I employ 21 people. It's a little snapshot about what Limeworks and my masonry company, which still operates, is all about. But people would come to us and say, could you give us a little tutorial on how to lime plaster or how to point with lime? We understand it's a little different than cement. So we would haphazardly run these classes. But then I decided, after my wife gave me the blessing, to buy a farm. I bought the farm. I say, you can always say that twice, right? I bought the farm. And that means I signed up for another 30 years of hard labor. I said to myself, I don't golf, so I'm not going to retire at 65. I'm going to just continue to go off in the sunset, trying to preach the trade to anybody who has ears to hear this thing, that you can make a great living and you can be happy with what you do. So I bought this farm. We've been restoring the buildings, using our products, but then we more formally made a syllabuses and actually a schedule for the year. We have an events planner. It was running swimmingly. We were always busy. How I would do this? I would have my regularly scheduled programs. In other words, we are a contractor and we would go out and do the work. But then I would take my guys off jobs and have them run the Craftwork Training Center, the classes there. And the purpose was to train whoever would sign up for the class. For those who were seasoned professionals, they wanted just a little bit of a augmentation to what they already knew about cement mortar. And then we actually have homeowners across the country who, I love them, but that wasn't my mission. But they come here because they say, I can't find anybody to point my chimney. I live in Michigan, and I'm coming to take a class because I'm going to point the chimney myself. So although we enjoy having them and we enjoy teaching the seasoned professionals, my intent was to try to incubate another generation of craftspeople, not just people to get a job and make a livable wage, but people who are in love with the trade. That was the intent. So I figured if I get my guys who do this work every day, who know what they're doing, and then they come in there and maybe share and come alongside these people who would come, then maybe we would, have some takers, and then next thing you know, I'd be solving the problem. Well, we're up against the same thing everyone else is. Young people, when you tell them, "Hey, how about you want to become a mason or a carpenter?" I think it must sound a little bit too much like work. That's the first part. That sounds like work. And then secondly, it's like, oh, yeah, my dad or somebody was that. He was a drunk, or he was and it was a second class citizen thing. I don't want to associate with that. And the prestige to go to university. Well, the nice thing is Bucks County Community College, which has a 2-year associate program for historic preservation. It took us about a year or so, but they actually now will issue a prior learning unit college credit towards their 2-year associate degree when you take a class with us. So we're trying to track young people, say, hey, look, you could take these classes and think about, just wet your whistle, try this brickwork or stonework or some other crafts we're teaching, and if you enjoy it, then maybe you want to pursue it. But if not, you could also work on that college degree. You can get your associate degree, and we just are not getting exactly the enthusiasm that I hoped we would get. But I also don't think that I really showed them the coin, show me the money. I don't think I really got the message out there that you can not just make a livable wage, but you can make a very lucrative wage. And so I'm not giving it up yet, but even though my biblical reference here is, using unrighteous mammon, people know that word, unrighteous money, to accomplish a good thing. So why I'm using that verse to say that is that, oh yeah, money can be a dirty thing, and you might have lured somebody in with, hey, you can make big bucks, which we know is like, oh, gross, like that's what you're in it for, just big bucks. All right, but that's what people's ears might perk up for. But then my dream would be that, like 10 years down the road, someone would come back to me and say, you know what, you tricked me. You lured me in by that coin, that little sparkle, a jingle, right? And then I was in it for the money. And then a few years later, I fell in love with the trade, and you tricked me. And so I'm actually doing whatever I can do, pulling out all stops, even if I got to trick people, to get in the trade, because I believe if they try it for a while, they will fall in love with it. And it's very, very gratifying. And so this is what we're doing. Now, COVID dropped a bomb on us, like everybody. We had to shut down Craftwork Training Center because we can't train alongside anybody, really. However, we're itching to do this, and we had a couple private concerns that asked us. One very, very large brownstone and brick building in Rittenhouse Square, Philadelphia. We're coming alongside professional masons, and we are just augmenting and coming alongside and helping them to just bring in the quality of what they've already been doing restoration, but bringing in the quality of some little not haughty, but we're coming alongside and sharing with them our experiences and how we can change the outcome of the quality of the restoration project. So that's how we're training right now, and we're sort of in a closed group. So I have my guys out there, not on our project, but coming alongside. We also did that for a homeowner in Delaware who hired somebody and they didn't know what they're doing. So I sent my guys out to train another group that never really did this work, and we walked them through it. And matter of fact, they just finished washing the job down yesterday and said, my gosh, they did an incredible job. So that's how Craftwork Training Center was. This, had a formal schedule, and the intent was, one, because I own Limeworks, one hand washes another. If somebody takes a class and learns how to use our product, sure, then they would then go buy our product. So I had to keep telling myself, oh, there's a legitimate bottom line business reason you're doing this, Andy. Come on, you're smart, But then the truth is, behind it, running a school is a money sink. My gosh, that you got to be crazy to run a school. I mean, I'm doing this because I'm a lifer. I'm sick. I love the craft, and I do not want it to go down the tubes. I want it to be revitalized. The other thing is talk about the fields being white for harvest. You know, it's so expensive to build a new building that the rehabilitation of the existing stock of aging structures, this trade is going to just go through the roof if it's not already. There is so much more need than I think we're even realizing. So we could never get enough people in these trades. And so wish me luck, because I'm not giving up. I'm still keyed up, and I'm tenacious. You know, I won't quit. So that's my story, and that's what I've been doing. I don't know if I answered everything about what you hope to hear from me, but I'm a tradesperson. We have a construction company, and we fold in students into classes we run, and we get live commissions that, like, we've had to restore doors, shutters, and windows in our wood shop, and we had the commission already. We're getting paid anyway. So we would take on anyone who wanted to learn from us. But unlike a bricks and mortar school that has this huge overhead of staff and turning the lights on and everything, we are doing projects that were real time, where we are actually going to do the commission anyway, whether a student came or not. And so now my latest thought is that classrooms, especially ones that have been, it's very demoralizing. We were sent down to Kentucky to run a class where the government paid people to be to get back into the workforce. And my guys who went down there said, I couldn't rope these people in. They kept disappearing from the room. They didn't care what they're doing. They didn't have any stake in it. They didn't pay to take that class. The government told them, we're paying for you to go attend a class, and maybe you can't get your unemployment money unless you prove that you took a class, and that was so demoralizing to the teacher. The teacher, we didn't even want to do that because we want somebody who really wants to know. Why would we waste our time? So now what I'm thinking is, my next twist to this whole thing is that, I think that this coming alongside and working real time on projects, especially, God bless all those volunteers at little one-room schoolhouses and historic societies with an aging group of archivists and people who are trying to save their cultural heritage in their own little village, and they're trying to have a cookie sale on a Saturday to put a new roof on. That's a lot of freaking cookies, to make a slate roof again. So I'm saying,
Andy.
yeah.
Andy, I need to interrupt you so we have some time for questions.
Hey, Andy.
Okay, I just want to finish the last part about this is that these people, I feel that if I was to run a workshop rather than a school at our Craft Work Training Center, it might behoove us and the whole problem if we assemble ourselves as a field school out at a ailing historic structure, and then do the job at some contracted figure that we can fold in people who are also going to be learning as they go. So then it's a win-win in that sense that those who are trying to guard their historic structure would get something that they can retain the materials rather than throwing it away at a school that after we're done, we take it all out. And then the trade would be taught, and we could keep it in motion because money needs to be a part of what funds some of this. And so a grant or something to come along and help fund this would be helpful. So that's my next twist to what I intend to do.
Thank you, Andy.
Well, that was a remarkable transition. Oh, I'm echoing. Does that mean?
I'm echoing too. No, I'm not echoing.
Okay, is that better? Well, thank you all for your enthusiastic presentations this morning. I do want to roll into the questions. This disembodied voice is Karen Arnold, and I ran the Keystone Historic Preservation Grant Program for the State Historic Preservation Office. So, Andy, that was a wonderful transition. So our first question, I think, was really directed to Nick. And Christine Musser had wanted to know if VOTEC students were able to visit the program in Frederick, Maryland, either just to visit or sort of, and I'm assuming she means sort of an initial to kind of engage them in wanting to actually attend full time. Nick, you might be muted. No.
Let me leave the session and come back.
Now we can hear you.
Oh, I'm back? Okay. Okay. I did not hear the question. It was a little garbled on my end, but if you summarize it quickly, I'm sure I can do it.
Sure. Christine Musser had wanted to know if VOTEC students were able to come visit the program in Frederick, Maryland, if either initially or as full-time students.
Yeah. So we had actually planned on doing a bunch of that this year, and that obviously all got put on hold because just we can't pull groups of people together and travel and all that kind of stuff. But I do think it's critically important. We actually have partnered with there is a very interesting model here in Maryland, a site called the Silver Oak Academy, which is basically it's a part of the criminal justice system. It's a way, instead of sending kids to juvenile detention, they send them to a boarding school where they were required to, at the end of it, select one of what they call the 3 E's: employment, enlistment, or further education. They actually have a trades program at Silver Oak, which is quite cool. And we have worked with them and have a partnership with them to try and get kids out of this high school program into the Historic Preservation Training Center and their apprenticeship program. And that, obviously, the pandemic put all of that on pause. But I think, to Andy's point about getting kids excited about this and making it a viable opportunity and option, I think it's something that has to be done. I don't think we can wait until they're in college to try and pivot or get them to think about it. I think it's something that has to happen early. And I think to the point about VOTEC having a stigma is a problem. And I think that it's incumbent upon all of us to try and elevate the trades. And there's different ways of doing that. I mean, you can talk it up to young people, but I also think if you're in a preservation group locally, or you run a statewide, or you are just engaged in this in some way, one thing that we've done is we've created an awards category specifically for the tradesperson. A lot of preservation awards are about the group, or about the developer, or about the property owner. But what about the person whose hands physically did the work? And all too often, I think that is overlooked. So it's important for us to elevate the trades in every opportunity, in every way we can. And I think collectively and cumulatively, that will have an impact on the way people look at the work. But I think it's important for us to celebrate those people who make the work possible. And I think it's very easy for us to overlook that. And that happens all too often.
Thank you. Actually, Christine had brought up a similar point as well, that Cumberland Valley High School actually partners with a lot of trade businesses. And I guess her question is then, are you aware of, much like Andy's suggestion, that are other preservation trades partnering with high school VOTEC programs as a way to promote their trade, not only for employment, but also entering into their craft programs?
Yeah, the one that I would say is Silver Oak Academy, and the cool thing is that they have a partnership with Catoctin Furnace Historic Site, and they have been doing some really interesting rehab work with a historic site. So they actually have a trainer, and they train the kids, and then they get project work done. So that is actually one to probably take a look at, just sort of an out of Pennsylvania example if you're looking for something.
Okay, Interesting. So we've talked mostly about younger people entering the workforce, but what about others who might be transitioning from a second career? I mean, are you aware of a whole lot of preservation trade training centers, specifically perhaps in South Central Pennsylvania, that are welcoming to those professionals who are 30 and might be looking at an alternative career later in
I
life?
can answer this one a little bit. So it's interesting. The average age of students entering preservation trades programs, formal preservation trades programs, is actually 27. So a lot of them get into it a little bit later. They've tried, traditional four-year school, decided it wasn't for them, or do have a degree and decided it wasn't for them. When I was teaching at Savannah Tech, I had a student who came in with her master's degree in Chinese history. And she said, I want to do something else. And she turned out to be fantastic. But the problem is, you have a situation like you're having here. Unfortunately, in the Harrisburg region, there isn't a preservation trades training center. And those students, as a teacher, I love my mid 20s and above students. They're a little bit more serious. They've got a little bit more, invested in it. Some of them have families they have to take care of. They have bills to pay. They've seen what it's like to flip burgers, and they're going to do it. But those students are less likely to be able to just pack up and move somewhere else, and that kind of deters them from entering these programs. So in Pennsylvania, the closest trades training program in a formal setting is actually in Bucks County has all their programs online. The closest one is actually in North Carolina. So that.
Can I just jump in there and just say that, we have been, if we could run at every opportunity as an organization that has kind of put our name out under this, and we operate all of this, I don't think I even mentioned it, under a program we call the Campaign for Historic Trades. If we could run at every opportunity that has been presented to us, we would have 50 different programs going on right now. It's not for a lack of that. We just have to be very strategic. But us and the training center have had older adult organizations reach out to us about training folks who are maybe 45 and above, or truly second career type situations. And it's one of those things that's on our wish list of things to do. It's just a challenge. One of the other things too is that the way the training center program works is that it's technically an AmeriCorps appointment. That's how we fund it, and that's where some of the funding comes from. And there is a way for grandparents to do AmeriCorps work and transfer the educational credit to their child or to their grandchild. So there is sort of an interesting component of service in the parks that could become a part of this, because obviously a lot of the work that we're doing is in national park units. And with the passage of the Great American Outdoors Act, there are literally billions of dollars that are going to be thrown at rehab work in parks, which is almost a comedy of riches, because it's how on earth do we actually do all of this work? So that is a piece. And then just something that made me think of this too is what Steve was saying, is that being able to pick up and move and do a job elsewhere. The biggest barrier that we found in doing recruitment, some of our pilot program recruitment was going into inner city Baltimore, working with existing sort of entry-level construction trades programs where they got just very basic, job safety, soft skills, stuff like that. They were interested in coming out. This sounds great. To Andy's point, wow, you can make a livable wage doing this. You can feel really proud about what you're doing. I want to do it. Okay, well, you have to drive from Baltimore to Frederick. It's an hour. Mm-hmm. Well, that's the barrier. And we didn't have a campus to put somebody, so that became a barrier. So housing becomes an issue. So, sort of to Andy's point about the quickest way to lose money is by running an educational program. It's just it snowballs into this, how on earth, we're not even looking at, because we have a Park Service partner, they're paying for the trainers and the projects. We're just trying to pay for the wraparound, and that alone is a huge issue. So we are right now sort of in the quiet phases of looking at how we would develop a new campus for the training center that would have housing on site so that people could live there and come and be a part of this. But when you're thinking about the barriers to this, it's not just. I mean, there is a profound barrier in stigma, and there's a profound barrier in I don't want to work, or I don't want to do trades work, or like Andy was saying, wow, that sounds a lot like work. But there's also the barriers of transportation, of housing, of just being able to pick up and move and do that kind of work later in life. So those are all things that we've learned a lot about that and are trying to remove those barriers when we find them. But there are big challenges associated with getting this work done and the training done.
And then going back to that, it's an issue that we have. We have a lot of these programs that have started and unfortunately are no longer with us. They're placed in very rural environments. And for some, it's, we've got money from the state, they've given us this, or a lot of programs, they're like, we're going to save our town by creating this preservation program. But you can't get people there because not only do they have to actually go to school and they have to live, but they also have to pay their bills. So if you're in a town that has 500 people in it and you need to work and you want to attract 30, 40 people a year, they can't all go work at the local bar. They can't all go and flip burgers on the weekend. And a lot of these kids will come and they realize they can't pay their rent, and then they leave. And every time one of these programs opens, it creates more of a barrier for other schools to say, we want to do this. The list of failed preservation programs is infinitely higher and longer than the successful preservation programs. And you get into a situation like what Nick was talking about, of you need to go somewhere else to do this. But then to a larger percentage, say Philadelphia Community College system, they don't have shop space. They're a community college. They're not a technical college. They don't have the shop space to create a program like this. And the cost per square foot in, say, Philadelphia is much more expensive than it is, out in Harrisburg. So that means your carrying costs are even higher. So all this goes back to that balance of how do you get to that point where it's equal. Fortunately, when you start off with a balance that's way lower, because of all these costs, you don't have the time to get it up to here, unless you have outside funding, which outside funding tends to dry up after a while.
Well, that's interesting, and that kind of slides us right into Melissa's question, and she was asking about a lot of work within inner city neighborhoods and trying to attract trade development there as a way to promote home ownership, not only for employment, but I think that you might have answered a lot of those problems with creating such a large-scale project. But are you aware of anything similar to that other than the one Nick mentioned in Baltimore, where you're working in a urban area and trying to promote some of these trades and skill sets to sort of help with some of the equity and inclusion initiatives that are happening within trades?
So I work with a group in Savannah, Georgia. It's a national organization. It's called Youth Build. And Youth Build takes kids 16 to 22 who have dropped out of school. Some of them have criminal records. They get GED training. They came to Savannah Tech when I was at Savannah Technical College to get a certificate in carpentry. And they build houses for the community, low-income houses through a program that Savannah had called the Dream Makers program. What they did differently is they actually got 6 lots from the city of Savannah. 4 of them had houses on them, and they were in the Collier-Brownsville Historic District, which is historically was a African-American middle-class neighborhood. Unfortunately, fallen on some harder times. So they rehabbed 4 of those houses and then used the other 2 lots to build compatible infill, where they could have done something much cheaper and much quicker, which was a great way to do it. Did they follow all the Secretary of Interior standards? I'd like to say they did, but let's be honest, they didn't. But it was a step in the right direction. And there are these kind of pocket programs out there that can do things like this. But one thing that is something that's really important is going back to, again, that stigma of the trades. A lot of people and I hate to say this, but for some trades, it's the last step. There's a reason why certain trades don't drug test, because they wouldn't have a lot of people in. And because we don't have this national certification program, anyone can kind of got a truck and a ladder, you're a painter. To me, you're a good painter, but it doesn't mean you're a painter. So one of these situations where a lot of people that have to attract those people that are going to have the passion of the skills and everything like that Andy was talking about, if we're saying at the same time, look, you're going to sit in a class where it's either these guys are in this class or they can't get their unemployment benefits or they can't get, or, it's incarceration, alternatives. That's not saying that those people don't deserve those opportunities to learn these trades. But it also comes back to this idea of stigmatizing working with your hands. And it's
I do think, I was just going to say that I do think that there is another one. Sorry, it's hard on Zoom to know when you can jump in. But I was going to say there is one, and maybe Mindy knows a little bit about it, but there's, in terms of an example of an existing, like, urban pilot program, the William Penn Foundation and the 1772 Foundation, I think with the University of Pennsylvania, are putting in a program somewhere in the city of Philadelphia to try and do trades training in an urban environment. I know we have tried to do some of that. It's, all the things that Steve's talked about are the barriers. And I think the other thing you have to think about too when you're talking about these programs is it's like you've got to come up with the money for.
Yeah. There's the group.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's a organization in Philadelphia called Orleans.
Yeah.
And a friend, Herbie Alston, he is involved with that. And I know in Harlem there's a program that run by a church. That
yeah, or a youth build program.
Yeah, right, a youth build, right.
Interesting. We also had a question, Andy, about the program you mentioned, the Restore Intensive course in Williamsburg. Is that only for masonry, or do they do other trade programs like carpentry, restoration? And then what is the follow-up question to that is, what sort of experience level is required to enter that course? I mean, is it for first-time or more seasoned professionals?
Yeah, no, I haven't kept up with Restore. It's in Manhattan. In New York, it's all caps. You can look it up on Google if it's still in existence. And then I couldn't attend their, maybe it was a 6-month or 9-month program in the city. So they had the 2-week intensive workshop in Williamsburg, and this is 1986. So Jan C.K. Anderson was the one who ran the program, but again, I sort of lost touch. Occasionally I'd bump into her at an APT event or something like that. But, somebody would have to do their own research to see where they're at and where they're offering classes.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure that any of you might be able to answer this question, but I'll throw it out there. There's a person who's working with the Sheepford Road Bridge, which is an 1887 through metal truss bridge with phoenix columns, and they're having problems with finding an engineering company who can specialize and work with such a sort of historic fabric. Any suggestions of where they might be able to go to look for such an animal?
I would
excuse my pun.
International. They have some great sponsors and groups that are involved in that. That is more of the engineering and architecture side of the hands-on restoration world. APT is actually finishing up their conference this week, or just finished up. They actually have an engineering subcommittee. They might be able to send you in the right direction. Unfortunately, I don't know many engineers that work on cast iron or iron bridges. So you're right. They don't.
You were garbled when you gave that name. Could you say that again?
The Association for Preservation Technology International, APT. They have their engineering subgroup that would probably be the best place to find.
And we're also going to be working with the Sheepford Road Bridge people, because we do have some engineers who've been doing some of the who have been working with PennDOT for some of the bridge rehabs that have been done. So we'll get Janice connected with the right people. I just want to note that we do have about 15 minutes left for questions, and when that 15 minutes is up, we will cut off. So if Karen can try to get through the rest of those questions, and go ahead, Andy, with your comment.
Yeah, there is a woman named Julie Bowers of Working Bridges.
Right.
And I think she might have hung it up, but there you go. There's an example of somebody who's not an engineer, but has such a love, knows every intricacy of these old bridges, and then probably has her network of people who are familiar with that bridge and that particular detail. So Julie Bowers, you can look up Working Bridges.
Thanks, Andy. That's a great resource. Yes.
Well, my colleague Pam Riley had a number of questions related to the impediments of the state of Pennsylvania, or what should the state really be doing to sort of assist in supporting training for the trades? Are there policies that the state has that ought to be changed? And, is there a group or entity that we should be considering to lobby for some of the changes to those policies? That was a mouthful, isn't it?
Well, I think one thing that has happened is something that Nick and his colleagues at ACHP are doing, is working on that Department of Labor coding information, where the DOL actually recognizes preservation trades as a career, because that will change the state of Pennsylvania's ability to identify those folks and then actually build the labor information that they need to justify spending the money. And that's something that, because again, just like Nick brought up, is I've had that same conversation with here in Pennsylvania, in Georgia, and South Carolina, is we've got 17 carpentry programs. Why do we need another one? Well, yeah, because they're all new build stick programs. And they just go, and that's, so without that first kind of change, and it's something that I forgot to bring up, and when Andy was talking about the stuff that the ACHP and Nick and Preservation Maryland and the National Park Service have done, there hasn't been a overall study of preservation trades training in the United States since the 1968 Whitehill Report. And the 68 Whitehill Report was actually part of preservation education as a whole in architecture and engineering, and they wrote a little bit about trades. It's 3 pages long. And half of it is the repeat of the first half. So there hasn't been any real study since then. And until that work gets done, I think a lot of states are going to keep going around in that same circle of, well, we have these programs already, the DLL number isn't there. Once I think the white papers and those changes happen within the federal government, it's going to be I hope it's going to be a lot easier for state governments to see how this works and what the value of it is. Unfortunately, it's not something that can be done overnight. This has been a fight. I've been doing this for 20 years, and unfortunately, I'd like to say I wish we were further along than we were since I started this, but we're making inroads in the right direction. And that's really important. We didn't get into this situation overnight, and we're not going to get out of it overnight.
Thank you. So Christina also had a question that's sort of a little off topic from what we've just talking about, but working, since it's so cost prohibitive for the traditional school setting, what kind of apprenticeship programs are available through unions, trade unions, and for communities where local institutions might not be willing or unable to have traditional trade schools? Could this be a viable path, sort of much like the mentoring program that Andy had talked about before?
I can jump in here, and I apologize if my internet's going in and out, and if anybody has questions, they can always reach out to me directly. But we have worked in some capacities with unions, and I'm curious what Steve and Andy would have to say about this. What we found often is that they rely heavily on DOL training money. So if the money there for historic trades, and they're not going to do it. And they're also heavily focused on new build construction. Like I know the masonry union here in Maryland recently got rid of, within the past couple of years, their repair masonry component. So they literally only teach new build. So the unions have reached out to us. They're interested. They're participating in the advisory council component. I think if they see the value, one of the things that I understand that the National Trust is apparently going to be working on is sort of a landscape survey of the jobs associated with trades. We need that soon. They were talking about that being a 3-year plan to get a plan or something, but we'd like to see that a little bit sooner. So maybe we could call on our colleagues there to try and front load that. But that will be what gets that, and DOL funding will be what gets the unions to be more participatory, I think, in the process. They're not opposed to it. It's just that they don't, just like colleges, they want to see the jobs. And just like any other training program, they want that federal money to be available. Obviously, they have other sources of revenue and income to support that, and they're not opposed to it. But it has definitely not been the priority focus for the unions, at least in our experience here in the Midwest.
I'll say that, as far as the trades go, the IMI, the International Masonry Institute, is the training branch of the union masons. And I'll talk about world-class facilities, world-class training, world-class guys that come out of those programs. They, are to be envied, and they have like 50 or 60 of these training facilities across the country. They've sent their trainers to be trained by us on the nuances of our material. It's not like we have the answers to everything, or we know somehow something that's better, well, we may know a little something that's better, but the point is that we're all into the intricacies of the details of the trade, and the union really offers not only great training, but they're a proud group, and then plugs you into great jobs. It seems to me like every masonry contractor, and probably union too, I differ with you about the idea that they're not as maybe concerned with getting into preservation, because the truth is, as I mentioned, it's becoming harder and harder to build new buildings, and so what's happening is that every masonry contractor I know is putting out the shingle. Oh, I do masonry restoration, repointing, and all that as well. They're adding that because they know to repair the existing inventory of structures that stands is it going to just continue to grow. So I know unions they're dying for more workers as well to get in and talk about a great trade. I feel like what we're doing is just shows you that on the end of a working mason, pulling myself up by the bootstraps and funding my own crazy delusion here with running this trade school, this little craft work training center. The union is a more well endowed and serious organization. I'd like to think that we could do something that would be on the same level. I think the only way for us is to do it, like I said, in real time efforts on structures that need it, and in real time we're actually restoring these, training people, and actually getting paid, and maybe that would be the way we would continue to flourish. But it seems like every time I've had an experience with union training facilities, it's just been world class.
Yeah, I know that the Local 1, which is the Bricklayers and Allied Union or Allied Trades here in Philadelphia, and Andy may have been involved in this. They did some training on line mortar repairs at Eastern State Penitentiary.
Yeah,
you were
we supplied the material for that. Yeah.
And they did that with the guys here at Williamson, as well as their apprentices, and I believe some high school kids were involved. It was before I came to Williamson. I believe it was last fall. And those kind of trainings, which was done by the IMI, led by the IMI, was apparently, from what I was told, a fantastic opportunity. And I tell the kids here that are working on Stell Dorm, which is a Furness building, which is, I think, Andy, that was your dorm when you were here.
I lived at Stella. That's right.
I said, do you guys understand that there are plenty of people out there that will never work on a Furness building, and you're doing it every day? And the same with those kids that work at Eastern State. It's like, I've never worked at Eastern State. I'd love to work at Eastern State. And these guys do it as a training center. And those kind of partnerships, not just with the IMI, but these group partnerships with multiple organizations that can all help each other out is really the way forward. A lot of times we work in these little bubbles and we keep trying to reinvent the wheel. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel. And with Nick's program of creating that curriculum, that national curriculum that open source that anyone can adopt, will do a lot to actually eliminate some of that repetitiveness that we constantly are going through, which is also constantly a detriment for these programs working. If you've got to spend 6 months building curriculum and you paying people for that, that's 6 months that you're not actually training people. So having that open source curriculum and working together as partners, and I see a question over here about a CCC to teaching young people on the trade. And I think that's fantastic. And again, going back to that open source curriculum, that could be something that could be adopted or at least looked in that matter. Of course, that involves a significant amount of money.
There is, to that point about CCC and the money, the Great American Outdoors Act, which some of you may be familiar with, which is about a $9 or $10 billion investment in the national park system. One of the things, so we're members of the CORE Network, which is America's Association of Public Service Corps. So we have a public service corps authority that allows us to fill positions, and we're growing out that component. I haven't really talked about that, but we are in the process of kind of building that out. And one of the things that the CORE Network is looking at is basically using Great American Outdoors Act money as the stimulus to create a modern CCC. So we're not going to get, well, maybe we will, but we're probably not going to get a true CCC anytime soon. But we have the nucleus for it in the modern core networks. And so one of the ways that this could be done is incentivizing trainees on Great American Outdoors Act projects. So when they do procurement, so we're getting real wonky, but when you get into federal procurement, prioritizing having core members on those projects, which can be more expensive, as Andy and Steve know, if you're going to have trainees, and that slows the work down and you've got to train them. So you got to give them a little bit of credit for a contractor that comes in and says, we'll take 3 trainees on this project. And so that's why our dollar figure is slightly higher. And so you should still select us, even though we're not lowest bid, but we're including that. And I will also say, so the core network normally is very crunchy, like trail builders, and that's kind of their bread and butter. We got in there, and now we have 5 other core that we're leading a conversation with about creating really like a historic preservation affiliation or interest category within the core network, which has never existed before. Because there's Northern Bedrock, there's Hammer Corps, Historic Corps to some extent does some of this and works under that authority. So there are these corps out there that are interested, and we're talking about how we can kind of really make that something that works and is as powerful as, say, like the trail building. The more soft skill type thing. And it's more challenging, right? Like you can send, not anybody, but you can send most people out to build a trail. But lead abatement and dealing with mortar and, those things they're a little bit more challenging and they require more hand-holding and more funding and all those sorts of things. But I do think we have a big opportunity with Great American Outdoors Act, and there's a hell of a lot of parks in Pennsylvania that are going to benefit from this. I think quietly what we're hearing is that, the initial, for good reason, the initial emphasis is going to be on America's most visited national parks. So I happen to imagine that maybe a little battlefield in South Central Pennsylvania will be getting some love. But so I think that that's something that Pennsylvanians should take a look at. And if you're in an organization that wants to participate in that, or there's a core that's going to be working in your community, and you're interested in this CCC model, look at the core network, look at what cores are doing, talk to core that are based in Pennsylvania, because this is a huge opportunity. And just because they're based in PA doesn't mean they're doing preservation work. In fact, they probably aren't. And they might be inclined to do that if they knew about these programs and the dots can be connected. So it is something to look at, and it is probably the biggest opportunity we have for a CCC type model since the Great Depression, which is the second time I've mentioned it.
Okay, I need to jump in here because I have like 30 seconds left. I want to thank the panel. You guys are a great team, and I know you could keep talking for another couple of hours. The chat will be available after the session is over. Just go into the schedule and you'll be able to see that. The resources that you've been mentioning and that Sabra has been sharing will be in the resource guide that is being sent out to everyone after the conference is over. So if you didn't catch them, you will get them all in an email. Thank you guys so much. This is great.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Mindy.
Welcome.